Well, you guys, if you're listening, you might be getting a auditory only podcast, depending. Because as we are currently recording on this lovely July 4th, we have some flickering. I feel that our podcast recording app is celebrating the 4th of July early with some sparkler action or something like that.
It's just,
How
yeah,
are
like
you, Mare?
I'm good. I was like, she's going there. She's making that correlation.
I'm going there.
I'm doing great. I'm super excited as always to be recording, and it's a beautiful day here. So hopefully everybody, wherever you are, celebrating July 4th. It's a beautiful day with sun, and I'm imagining, hoping like pool or beach or something. That's my visions.
Yes, very, very America kind of
Yeah.
vibe. It is our typical off on showers here in Florida on the 4th of July. It's like always like a thing. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's when the summer storms just kick in, but that's where we're at. But today we're going to talk about, I feel like my favorite topic, or like I feel like I just am always talking about this, is the importance of stomach acid and how we can support stomach acid with diet, lifestyle, supplements, and just so many different instances of like client cases where we want to support stomach acid production and that aren't isolated to gut health cases.
Exactly. I will kind of start with a question for you. What is like some typical things that you start thinking of when like a client tells you feedback? What's some feedback you normally hear and you're like, huh, I wonder how stomach acid is doing?
Yeah, so like you said, correlation with the fireworks, not always causation. But whenever I hear bloating or slow motility, if I hear protein is just sitting heavy, or I can't get more than 120 grams of protein, it just, is too much, like I can't digest it, or I don't eat meat because I can't digest it well. These are all like some kind of clues that I start thinking about that might indicate that somebody has low stomach acid as far as biofeedback. Potentially reflux, acid reflux. But honestly, that's not, I feel like that is a very popular thing to say in functional medicine and the functional health coaching space is, oh, if your client has acid reflux, they need more acid.
Yeah.
Sometimes, maybe, but I have seen way too many cases where that is definitely not the case. And you might light something up, if you push the acid issue.
Yeah, I would definitely want to make sure that person doesn't have an ulcer before you start giving them betaine.
Right. Or, an inflamed esophagus. Let's actually look at this person's history. So it's not just the signs and symptoms, it's also like putting like together like the whole picture of the case, which I know but those are like the biofeedback symptoms or signs. What would you say, like maybe some like things like not in biofeedback, but things that maybe we're noticing as a whole in this person as far as low stomach acid or just needing support as far as just nutrient absorption? What do we see in labs?
Yeah, so this is where I would say we could be looking at some anemia markers. So maybe like low B vitamins. So we might be seeing some elevated like MCV, MCH. We also, not necessarily stomach acid, but I'm going to say partly just because we can see maybe even like pancreatic enzymes, bile, so just insufficiency in some capacity. Looking at any type of vitamins, whether it's B vitamins, whether it's looking at even like vitamin D, so even as a more fat soluble vitamin, looking at chloride specifically on lab work, that marker can be also kind of indicative. I want to be thoughtful when I say any of those lab work markers that it's not as simple as this equals that. You still have to make some correlations elsewhere. Even looking at iron markers, so if somebody looks like there's iron anemia happening, like I said, B12, whether that's like again B12, B9, B6, any of those guys, and even looking at other things like vitamin D, magnesium, those guys so much directly for stomach acid direct, but knowing that all the other players that interact with good stomach acid are things that are possible. Even looking for, I guess, going a little bit broader, If I see high elevated cortisol, so if I see high cortisol, we maybe could infer that possibly due to higher stress for, again, unknown reason, that perhaps stomach acid could be compromised or suppressed. That could be something that we could easily make a correlation to. Thyroid, again, so seeing low thyroid, because here again, thyroid is more than just replacing via a glandular. Our thyroid needs nutrients. It needs B vitamins, it needs omegas, it needs selenium, etc. And all that comes down to our digestive capacity. The last probably part that I'm thinking of on lab work is even looking at that CBC and looking at neutrophils, lymphocytes, and maybe even seeing if there's any type of possible elevations in these that might be indicative of some sort of gut dysbiosis, even though perhaps somebody doesn't have. And again, those aren't specific. Those are very general. There could be other type of viral infections, etc. Maybe they just got sick recently. But even looking at maybe there could be some sort of infection going on that could allude towards low stomach acid, even elevated ferritin. So knowing that the body will sequester iron, or can, not always, not perfect, but can be sequestering iron if there is, some sort of digestive overgrowth, which kind of goes back to, like, if we're talking about like overgrowths in the gut, going back to one of the jobs that is for stomach acid. It's for more than just breaking down our food. It's also an antiseptic in our gut, right? It keeps things at bay.
Yeah, I want to kind of reel back a little bit for our listeners and just give a little bit of background about like what stomach acid even does. Because we're talking about bloating, we're talking about protein, we're talking about nutrients here. So you can kind of get an idea of where we're going with this. But stomach acid is I like to think of it as the first kind of part of that digestive process as far as like the actual like breakdown of food. I always like to say that digestion starts with your brain because we see our food, right? And we anticipate eating. And stomach acid production actually starts with that. So what happens is your brain sends signals to your stomach and it causes the cells in your stomach to produce gastrin, which stimulates the release of hydrochloric acid. So that's where you might hear betaine HCl. That's where that HCl component comes from. So that stomach acid production, like Mary said, like it's also our first line of defense against pathogens because it is acidic. So it's July 4th weekend. So if you are like at a cookout or, whatever this summer, there are pathogens and bacteria in our foods. Like no matter how well you wash your hands or wash your veggies, it's there. And stomach acid helps as far as, supporting our defenses to, break those down or not have them, hit us as hard. And then the other cool thing that it does is it helps us break down and absorb our protein. HCl is I would say like one of the main, components as far as breakdown and absorption of protein. Then the even cooler thing that it does, I think, is then it tells the body to start releasing the other enzymes and bile that we need to break down not just protein, but carbs and fats. So now, when I say breakdown, I also mean like absorption here. So stomach acid, first line of defense, helps us big picture as far as breaking down all of our nutrients and absorbing those nutrients as well. So those are some of like the big things. And like, we could even like get into like, we won't because we only have so much time on this podcast, but liver, for example, like supporting like bile and liver and gallbladder. We want to be thinking about not just supporting those directly, but what do we need to look at upstream to ensure that, bile production is, where we want, liver, is kicking and working, how we want. You mentioned thyroid, like again, like, and it could be chicken or the egg. Like some of these issues could be impacting your stomach acid production. So maybe we want to get into some of the whys, unless there's anything you wanted to add there as far as like role of like stomach acid.
No, I think the whys are going to be a great segue to maybe the what we can do about it, or the free things we can even do about it. Yeah. So some whys that stomach acid can be low. One, kind of Sarah said chicken or the egg with regards to that thyroid. So unfortunately, thyroid is going to be fueling. I always look at thyroid, people always say, metabolism, and they associate metabolism with fat burn, but we have to think that's like the speed at which all the things are doing all the things. So when we start to have a lower thyroid function, this can also affect our enzyme production, our digestion capacity overall. So that's one thing. Again, chicken or egg would be thyroid health. Something that we've talked about, many podcasts, is under eating or under fueling, or you could be eating calories but under fueling with micronutrients. The other thing I mentioned earlier with regards to that cortisol piece, so high stress, our digestion works best in a parasympathetic, so a rest and digest state, not a fight, flight, or freeze state. So long-term prolonged stress, out of whack stress, I would say. And then infections, because infections are, again, they are a stress to our body. So here again, having prolonged chronic stress. And one thing I'll mention too about stress is that we've talked about before is outside of psychological stress, even prolonged pain, prolonged injury. So people that have had back pain for a very long time, even though they may get used to said pain, or again, we always talk about that we have a warped sense of pain ourselves, but injuries like that, prolonged aches and pains, that is a stress onto our body that we kind of forget about sometimes. The medications is another one I'll think about. So medications can also affect anything from dry mouth, which again, when Sarah's saying, digestion starts with the brain, again, the brain talks to the eyes, see food, we smell food, we taste food, all those digestive enzymes start there in the mouth, and then it is communicating down to our gut. So medications can affect everything from that saliva production, which will affect everything downstream. And the last one I can kind of think of is age. Age can also affect that as well. Is there any others that I maybe didn't talk well about or missed?
No, I think you hit on him, but yeah, I think the chronic stress, that's a big thing to think about. And even like you said, the physical acute stressors, like post-surgery, that came up, recently on a group mentorship call, is like, hey, yes, we know that after being on anesthesia and just pain medication, that can impact digestion. And then, just the stress of the surgery and going into that surgery and recovery in of itself could be, again, an added stressor, an added burden, I like to think of, on the body. So some light stomach acid support in those cases might go, a long way for you. I would say just naming a specific infection, H. pylori is the most common little guy that we see pop up on GI maps. And because, H. pylori can be a cause of low stomach acid. And it can also, it kind of, I like to think of it as like robbing stomach acid kind of from you. So that's why it is, in our opinion, often something that we do want to address because of the importance of stomach acid big picture. And we're going to get into habits, tools to support stomach acid production and levels. But I do want to just mention that you may need ongoing support as far as stomach acid production and stomach acid levels go, whether that's in the form of supplementation or digestive bitters, or what I always like to tell my clients is just pay attention. So, we know these symptoms, and, as coaches, especially, with our mentees, we like to just talk about hey, let's look at understanding these patterns and the whys, and know that the human body is not a perfect ecosystem that we're going to arrive at this protocol for you that you just follow for the rest of your life and that's all you're ever going to need. No, it's about stepping back, and say you are somebody and we're working through and supporting you through a gut protocol, and one of the things we identified was low stomach acid, and that's something that we're trying to boost. The tools that we start to implement, maybe 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the line, you start having more bloating, sluggish digestion. Maybe you have a surgery. Maybe you're just going through a stressful time in life. Maybe you are getting older. Hey, that's a time that maybe we want to insert some of those tools again. I just had a client contest prep, and we went through, a whole protocol for H. pylori. And during her prep, her digestion stayed easy breezy, beautiful. We also implemented stomach acid support in her prep, knowing that contest prep in of itself, plus low calories, plus her history here, plus, knowing that thyroid was downregulating, all reasons to apple cider vinegar bitters before meals, just like simple things that we're going to get into right now. But I just wanted to say that like, this isn't just the tools that we're going to get into. It's not just like you write this down and you do them all and then you forget about them. It's things to look at and see, what to integrate into your life.
I love that. One thing I'll just piggyback off and then I'll let you jump into the, habits and tools is I love the fact of approaching it from a place of curiosity and just instead of, again, being broken. And I think that changes the script from, again, being broken to, hey, my body changes and adapts. And maybe this is what I need right now as opposed to always, or maybe this is what I need right now, knowing my history, knowing how my body typically trends or adapts, where I need a little bit more support. And for your client, you knew her history and you're like, hey, you know what? Let's get ahead of this. Not that it's 100, but let's do what our due diligence here and support your body. This is where, like, even for pregnancy, so women who are, pregnant, this may be something that we hear quite often with regards to acid reflux, regurgitation, things like that. And they may need some support during that time. Again, very different because they are literally housing a human being and growing a life in there and organs are being moved around, etc. But again, they may need some support for a period of time and to which will likely change postpartum and maybe not. But I think that I really liked how you reframed that as far as like, hey, like, we know how your body trends. Let's do our due diligence to support it. Is it 100% that we can predict, the future? No, but, let's support what we do know.
Yeah. And it's not a whole ass protocol. It starts with what we said, the brain. Simply, I say simply, but that doesn't mean easy. Slowing down, chewing your food, not eating when you are a total basket case and just inhaling giant chunks of food. That is step one for anything. Because, again, like if you're just like throwing back, that, half a piece of chicken or, giant chunks of sweet potato and then wondering why, you're bloated, as you go to the next thing, it's probably not the chicken and sweet potato, it's how we consumed it. So slowing down, giving the body time to produce or to release that acid, just for food. I always like to say, you don't have to count your chews, but you want to have like an applesauce-like consistency. Take a couple slow, inhales, exhales, especially if you do feel just like tense before a meal, because let's be real. I mean, we're busy. We got stuff to do. This is like one of my things that I'm always coming back to for myself is noticing what mental state I'm in when I'm making a meal and making sure that it's not just off to the next so that I can better, absorb my food. And sometimes I'll wait like 15 minutes. I'll like, just, hey, let me, step away from, the desk or whatever, I'm doing. Let me just wipe the counter off, clean up a little bit, just notice my breath and focusing on simply breathing slower. And that really helps as far as just lowering that overall nervous system activity. And breath work and the act of chewing stimulates something called your vagus nerve. So you may have heard of the gut-brain connection. Well, that's a bidirectional relationship between your brain and your digestive, your stomach, essentially. And supporting that guy helps to release and boost stomach acid and just motility, all of that as a whole. So that's like my big first step is just that meal hygiene component.
Yeah, it's funny. That is the first step, and I'm going to say it right now for everybody. That is the step that nobody wants to do. It's really funny from like a coaching perspective. You'll hear a client be like, I don't want to use a bunch of supplements. I'm like, awesome, it's great. We have so many free things we can do. Let me list all the free things that we can do. And those are literally the things that nobody wants to do. I'm
Yes,
like,
I'm gonna
so babe.
call her out. I had a client say, "Hey, like I'm worried my H. pylori is back. Like, I was walking around and or I was eating my beef and, whatever meal, and I think beef is giving me issues again." And I was asking her about like what was in the meal, and then I like, just mentioned I was like, "Let's, check in on those meal hygiene habits." And she's like, "Do you think the fact that I was walking around the house when I was eating could have impacted my digestion?" I'm like, "Yeah, girl." Like, and that's like so like that. Let's focus on that rather than look at spending $330 and doing another GI map. Not that like we may not find something, but like if we can find a solution, like again, like not easy, but lower hanging fruit, let's seize it. You mentioned earlier, and I didn't want to miss us talking about this, was nutrients to support stomach acid. So it's not just that stomach acid helps us to absorb nutrients. We also need different minerals to support stomach acid levels. So salting your meals, especially if you are like whole foods diet, getting in enough sodium in your day for you and your body, zinc, B vitamins, potassium, all of those are important as far magnesium, all of those are important as far as stomach acid production and having, those good healthy levels and staying hydrated.
I'll say that that's where it can be like a double-edged sword, right? With regards to somebody who's, so again, like going to the example of your client, the client who's pacing while eating or eating while running out the door, or that is, whether we want to admit it or not, like that's not an ideal, again, digestive situation, and that is a little bit more stressful, so your body is having to work a little bit harder. But going back to like the adrenal piece there, like this is where, again, somebody who maybe has dealing with, and I think stress in a broad sense, all the definitions and sub articles of that word insert here, but when somebody has had long-term chronic stress and their sodium needs, potassium needs, magnesium needs are arguably going to be probably a lot higher than they think. This is also where the clean eating camp can also kind of be at a detriment with regards to minerals, because I know for like my household, I was really lucky enough that I did have a mom that was like really into wholesome foods. But one thing that she grew up on is that unless we are baking cookies, cakes, or pies, we do not use salt. So like salt was never like, it was like, not, I'm gonna say it's the Antichrist. It wasn't, not that bad, but we did not salt anything. And it was like a big no-no to add salt to your foods. But this is where like that clean eating camp can actually kind of shoot themselves in the foot, because again, clean eating camp, highly stressed individual who's on medications, you can already kind of see the spiral with regards to not having the mineral status that they need to, again, go back to the digestion piece.
And speaking of that clean eating camp, a couple other things that I wanted to touch on was hydration. So if you are getting like over a gallon of water a day and not salting your meals, you might be over hydrating with water. The other thing would be how you drink said water. So we ideally want to kind of put water in between meals and not be like having a bite and then having a sip of water. And people, when I first say that, sometimes they're like, "Oh my God, I'm going to choke." And it's like, if you chew your food, you will not. So
why would you choke? Like, I'm going to call people out on that. Like, my friend, like, why would you choke? And like, you would not choke. Like, you have saliva. Like, that is the point. Unless you have xerostomia, like, you got saliva, my friend. Like, you're not, folks.
Right. So hydrating between meals, and if you do need water during a meal, stick to like just, little sips. And then other thing, clean eating camp, raw veggies, like too many like raw veggies or under eating protein, vegans, vegetarians, because of those minerals that we need for stomach acid, you might not get enough, in your diet. So we might need to be looking at, supplementation. The other thing I would say is just like meal spacing is really big. So making sure that you're evenly spacing your meals throughout the day. And I'm not a fan of OMAD or one meal a day type diets. For some people, protein might need to be lowered either temporarily, or we need to be like girl, you're 130 pounds. You don't need 210 grams of protein a day. Having those kind of conversations, and why are we having so much protein at the expense of fats and carbs that might better fuel our performance? Or again, if we think about like those minerals that we need for stomach acid, maybe we implement some higher fat proteins or different protein sources if you're sticking to like super low fat, lean options, and just like variety in general. Like I'm such a big fan of nutrient variety, because if you're like chicken, rice, and broccoli, that's fine. It keeps it simple. It keeps it easy. It does help with stress, but maybe we can rotate in some shrimp, because shrimp has zinc, and zinc is going to be great for so many things, but stomach acid, maybe being one. Oh, I hate shrimp, Sarah. Okay, how about some pumpkin seeds? Like we got options, right? So there's definitely a lot of options and a lot of tools. And one of my favorites, digestive bitters. And we cannot end this podcast without talking about apple cider vinegar and digestive bitters. So do you want to kind of start that?
Yeah, so digestive bitters can be a great alternative, I think, depending on the human being, as opposed to like betaine stomach acid. It literally is what it says. It is using herbs, but that is in a tincture, and it tastes bitter. This is not tasting like chocolate. This does not taste like vanilla or strawberry. It is bitter. And the cool thing with that is if we go back to going back to our mouth, why bitters? So we have on our tongue different types of papilla. I'm not going to go into all that, but this is what it is. And those papilla do respond to different tastes. So taste buds is what most people call them. Bitters being one of those. And those bitters can help stimulate stomach acid. So we do or can get bitters in food, so like things like dandelion, arugula, otherwise known as rocket lettuce. But using a tincture of bitters is also really, really helpful. I'll be honest, I love digestive bitters. If anybody has ever had dandelion, the actual leaf, not tea, it is awful. I'm gonna say like dandelion leaves. I was like, I'll cook it like kale. I was like, oh, it was so bitter.
That sounds disgusting. I was going to say, I have trialed many a digestive bitter because, like I said, it's one of my favorites. And I am somebody that benefits from ongoing support as far as that stomach acid level goes due to my history, contest preps, thyroid. And I just noticed like, if I'm going to have like a meal that has like, let's say like 40-ish grams or like high 30s protein or higher potentially, like I definitely, if I'm home, I try to remember to take my digestive bitters or apple cider vinegar before a meal, diluted in water, as my resident former dental hygienist would love to remind us. And I am so guilty about not diluting it in water, honestly. But apple cider vinegar is also a bitter, of sorts, and not gummies, not a gummy. That is not it. It needs to be bitter for it to work. So I have clients that say I hate the bitters, like taste wise. And then I have others that say they love the taste. I would say some of my favorite brands are Gaia Herbs. I also really like Wish Garden has some good products. Urban Moonshine is like the OG. But let me tell you, that was the first one I tried. Story time. I am not a big drinker at all. If I am, I'm a tequila girly. But the first time I had Urban Moonshine, I was immediately flashed back to the time that I decided in college it would be a good idea to drink whiskey on the rocks with the boys. And ask me how that night ended. My head was in a toilet, like not good. So yeah, that was my little moment with the bitters. So I do like to warn people, but there's a lot of different formulas out there, and this is very important. Medications. There are people think herbs are powerful.
Yes.
They can be very powerful, and depending on you and any medications or just you as a person, if you're pregnant, there's things that are contraindicated. So always double check if you are on any medications or you're just not sure, because we don't want to just be blindly be supplementing, even if it is a herb. Apple cider vinegar as well, like I said, that acts as a bitter and helps as far as like priming the digestive process, etc. It can be a great tool. However, like how we started, this conversation, if you are somebody who is super lit up, inflamed already, or like maybe you have like Barrett's esophagus or I can never say this word. I said esophagitis. Can you say it for me?
Esophagitis.
Yes, say it again.
Esophagitis.
Esophagitis. Thank you. These might be too harsh for you. So different options. Like Mary said, there's definitely a lot of different foods. There's teas that we can use. For some people, betaine HCl supplementation might also be beneficial. Always start low and slow there. And again, maybe we have different conversations around that. But apple cider vinegar, for the most part, is, I would say, pretty safe. But again, like if you are someone that is very sensitive, always go slow, always ease into things when it comes to, anything.
Yeah, exactly. There's one other company I will plug, and again, we have no affiliations to any of these companies. We get no financial kickback. These are just companies that we trust and use, and we do spend a lot of time researching said companies, which is why when you message us and you are a client and you say, hey, what about this? It might take us a moment to actually assess that. But St. Francis Herb Farm it's a Canadian-based company. You can get it in the United States, but they are a really lovely company. So that's another company that I would mention as well.
I did just look it up because I wanted to make sure I got it right. But so I mentioned Wish Garden, but Herb Farm also both of them make a spray, which is super convenient for travel or, on the go, like throwing it in your purse, doing those spray bitters. Because like Mary said, a lot of them are tinctures, which I feel like the tinctures are, going to be a little bit more potent. But I do find the spray to be really just convenient. And I'm always reminding my clients to just leave it on the counter, leave the bottle of apple cider vinegar on the counter, put it next to your olive oil, make it, aesthetic, but, helps as far as, remembering. And just, before a meal, maybe 15 minutes before if we're being, perfect, but not something to stress about. And if you miss a meal, again, it is not the end of the world. This goes back to looking at how or what the body might need globally and giving it the tools to do its thing. That's my biggest thing. And what, I know something that you stand by is that the body is incredible. It's smart, it's capable, and sometimes we get in its way trying to do all of the things or make all of the changes. But body, I just need to chew my food a little bit more, and that helps you out a lot. That's really cool, especially if you are somebody that you feel like your bloating is random or you can't, like, you react to everything. That might be a big sign that it's a stress nervous system kind of component, and we need to get, really honest about, that, maybe we have a lot of food fears. Even that's a huge chronic stress, and maybe we need to think about like, ooh, like, maybe potatoes are giving you issues, or that meal out at the restaurant is giving you issues, not because you have an intolerance to potatoes, but because you're afraid of, the calories, or you're afraid of not tracking something perfectly at a restaurant. And that's like, it's so telling. I know you can attest to this. It is so telling when a client goes on vacation and has like the best digestion, no bloating, and they're drinking and like, doing all like things, like not a lot, but it's like, oh, I had gluten and I was fine. And they're not in Italy where their food's made way better than ours. They're traveling just, with family or friends, or just off the grid a little bit from work or whatever stressors. And that's a huge, hey, awareness moment.
Yeah, agree completely. Well, guys, I think that this was a really solid one. And if you have clients, hopefully that this will kind of help you troubleshoot things a little bit more. Sarah and I did mention that if you are feeling that there's something a little bit more under the hood that is contributing to this. This is where we do think that doing testing like a GI map, like she mentioned with the H. pylori, is really important. But as you can hear, like there's so many things that arguably we believe should be done first, because frankly, if you're going to do a GI map, these things have to come first anyway. They're going to be our first recommendation. So why not get started on it, and who knows, actually troubleshoot some things down to where maybe they don't need that GI map at this time.
And if you haven't already downloaded it, I will put in the show notes our prerequisites before starting a gut quote unquote protocol. And until next time, you guys, we will see what we got for you, but stay tuned.